In June of 1992, a group of elite police officers were out for a routine training run through this quiet park in the Czech Republic, when they suddenly stopped in their tracks. Something didn't smell right. Seconds later, what they would stumble across in the tall grass would not only spark one of the country's most horrifying murder investigations, but it would also reveal a terrifying pattern, one that still haunts detectives to this day. And the worst part? It may have all started with a simple dream: a young woman, a job abroad, and a stranger waiting at a bus stop. Let's dive in. In March of 1992, 21-year-old Dita Hrabankova was sitting alone at a bus stop in Prague. But she wasn't waiting to meet someone. She was waiting for her next chapter of her life to start. Dita was this very good-looking girl with long curly brunette hair, large black rimmed glasses, and a slim figure. She had graduated from high school and then worked as a clerk at a large construction firm while also improving on her English and Italian. You see, in the early 90s, foreign travel, both for work and leisure, was really booming. This was especially true because in 1989, the Communist Party had been finally overthrown after 40 years of ruling Czechoslovakia. And this meant that the borders were finally open. People could start traveling, they could even move away for work or study, which pre-89 was totally impossible. And so then you had lots of people taking advantage of this new freedom of movement. Especially the younger generations. I mean, they wanted to go out to the world, see more of it for themselves, get better education, jobs, and sort of seize every opportunity they could get their hands on. And Dita was no different. At the time, she lived alone with her parents, but once she finished her studies back in Czech, she actually began preparing to go to Italy as an au pair, hoping to earn money for her future studies. She knew that she would need to work much longer back home if she ever hoped to earn enough to be able to get her bachelor's degree, and so the prospect of going abroad and earning more there seemed like a really good idea to her. In fact, she had already visited Italy once, and when she had been there, she had focused on getting to know the locals and had made quite a few friends. But unfortunately, she had been unable to secure a job. But as soon as she returned home, Dita said to her mom that she was not done. In fact, she was already planning on returning to Italy with one of her closest friends so that they could look for work together. And to make this plan work, Dita contacted an agency that used to help people with getting jobs abroad. And while they didn't have work for her right there and then, they still asked her to fill out all these forms so that Dita could be added to their database. And in fact, these forms were so detailed that Dita even had to include her blood type. Now, this was seen as highly unusual because usually you don't need to disclose this. But Dita didn't mind at all. All she was thinking of was getting to Italy no matter what. And so she went out to fill everything she had been asked into, hoping that soon enough the perfect opportunity would just come up. Now, while Dita was waiting for her bus to arrive, she made a mental note of contacting the agency soon. She had actually not heard from them in a while, and so she hoped that maybe in all of that time, a job could have come up for her. So Dita thought that maybe in a couple of days she could go and pay them a visit to see if her application has been progressed. And she was just thinking that she could even bring them a small gift, like a box of chocolates, just so that she could be in their good books, when suddenly she spotted this tall, slim, blonde man approaching the bus stop. Now he smiled at Dita and asked if he could sit next to her, and Dita agreed. And soon enough, the pair were chatting like they were these old friends. The man introduced himself as Marek, and Dita felt very excited about talking with him. She found him to be very handsome, and it had been a while since she instantly clicked with someone like this. And when the pair got onto the same bus, Dita was actually really pleased when Marek asked to meet her again. They agreed to a meeting the day after, and then Marek had to say his goodbyes because that was his stop where he was getting off at. The following day, Dita was very excited but also nervous. She was to meet Marek at 5 p.m, and while it was still a few hours away, she was already pacing across her bedroom, trying to pick the best outfit. She had not been on a date in a while, and even though they seemed to get on really well the previous day, she still couldn't help but wonder whether that afternoon would also go so smoothly. Then Dita heard a soft knock on the bedroom door. It was her mom, and she was asking why Dita was pacing back and forth like that. She could hear her daughter through the wall all the way to the kitchen, and so she was really worried that something might be wrong with her. And to this, Dita just smiled and explained everything. And then she added that she was just really being conscious because she wanted this day to go really well. Her mom understood that because she knew that Dita hadn't really been dating recently. And so to help her out a bit and calm her down, Dita's mom began helping her choose what to wear. And in no time, Dita felt more like herself again. Even though Dita was now adult, she still really enjoyed spending time with her mom, and so moments like these were sort of precious to her, and she knew that her mom felt exactly the same way. And just a few hours later, Dita was finally ready to head out. She said quick goodbye to her parents, reminded them that she would be back home in just a couple of hours, and she left the house at around 4:30 p.m. By 5 p.m, excited but still a little bit nervous Dita arrived at the Kohinor bus stop in Prague, which is exactly where the pair said they would meet. Little did she know that soon enough, the whole country would get to know her name. 2 weeks later, a team of Czech Rapid Response Unit officers, think like SWAT-level operators, were doing a night run through Pruhonice Park, which is this peaceful area near Prague's botanical gardens. Now, the men were really used to this because it was really important to stay on top of their physique. The Rapid Response Unit, also referred to as the URNA in Czech, is this very specialized police unit of about 100 officers who deal with air assaults, counter-terrorism, hostage rescue crisis, and other high tactical operations. Basically, these guys are called out only for extremely serious and dangerous situations. And so because of this, their training is a crucial part of their everyday routine. Not only do they constantly have to be on top of their mental health, but their physical health is just as important. Now that night, they decided to take a slightly longer route via the park in Pruhonice, because the routes over there were just so much nicer than the streets, and also all of those trees provided a little bit of a cover to the unit, which is something they actually preferred. It was quite normal for people to feel a little bit uneasy whenever the unit was out and about, because everybody knew that their missions were pretty serious. So whenever the unit could, they would sort of stay out of the way from the general public, and that night was no different. As they jogged past a thick row of bushes near a stone wall, they were hit by this awfully sickly sweet smell, something their instincts immediately recognized. They slowed, fanned out, and followed the scent. As they were nearing the tall grass, the smell was only getting stronger. A few more steps and the men could see hundreds of flies swarming over this one particular spot in the grass. And buried beneath the stems was a badly decomposed human body. The unit immediately called for the emergency services, and soon enough, the park was filled with policemen. The area was sectioned off while the investigators were trying to determine what had actually happened there. They would soon discover that the body was a woman in her early 20s with dark long hair. Now, there was no ID on her, but the police did find her shoes and glasses lying nearby. And judging by the state of decomposition, it was evident that the woman had been dead for some time. But this was not really what really shook the investigators the most. It was what had been done to her body. And soon after, this particular detail would terrify the whole country. Her ribcage was cut open and her organs had been removed. But they weren't just gone. It looked like they had been surgically removed. Whoever did this must have had some sort of a medical knowledge. But that wasn't all. The autopsy revealed that she had been struck in the skull with a massive force, which is actually what had killed her. Traces of semen were found, but because of the decomposition, it really made it impossible to confirm whether she had been sexually assaulted or not. And lodged in her body was something that didn't belong there, a strand of hair. But upon closer inspection, it would turn out to be not hers. Having learned all of this, the police had to start an investigation somewhere. Now, they knew very little, but what they did know was becoming quickly one of the strangest and most chilling cases they had ever come across. Now, before we go any further, I would really love to hear what you think of the story so far. And if you think that this is something you'd like to see more often, then come and join the community. If you subscribe, then it doesn't really cost you anything, but it makes all the difference to me. So, thank you, and let's get back to the story. Just a couple of days later, after the woman had been discovered, the investigators would get their first break in the case. About 2 weeks earlier, a mother had reported her daughter missing after she had not come home from a date. She had provided a picture of her daughter, and when the investigators compared it to the case of their new Jane Doe, they found many similarities. So they looked more closely into this, and in the end they would determine that the deceased woman from the park was indeed the missing woman. And this was no other than Dita Hrabankova. But just when things couldn't get darker, they did. Exactly 6 months after Dita's body had been found, her purse together with her ID and wallet mysteriously turned up in an illegal dumping ground. But here's the weirdest part. The items looked freshly placed. no signs of weathering, no dirt, no DNA. So whoever left them there wanted them to be found. But why? Was it a taunt or maybe a message? And that's when the theories really started. Because don't forget, Dita had to fill out that unusually detailed job application before her death, one that bizarrely asked for her blood type. So some began to wonder, was this more than a murder? Was Dita harvested? Naturally, the media pounced and the public panicked. Who could have done something like this? The surgical precision pointed to someone with medical knowledge, someone who knew how to remove organs. So maybe a butcher, a vet, or a surgeon. The police started zooming in onto people in the medical sector who had run-ins with law, and soon enough they would find themselves the first real suspect, Petr Šimerle. Now, Šimerle did not actually work in any of those jobs himself, but interestingly enough, he had been nicknamed the surgeon by his closest friends. And that is because he had this intense interest in anything medical. He had studied chemistry, he loved biology, but the one thing he was really obsessed about was human anatomy. But this wasn't all. He had violent past, and he had even been charged with multiple sexual assaults. In 1988, Petr tried strangling this 22-year-old girl in Plzeň, but luckily the young woman managed to escape, just barely. Then, linked to his interest in chemistry, he started making all sorts of concoctions himself, which only led him to developing serious issues with drugs and also alcohol. Another proverbial nail in the coffin was Petr's ex-wife's confession, where she stated that he had actually been violent, antisocial, and even sadistic, so it's no wonder that he quickly became the prime suspect. But then, something very strange resurfaced. The police got notified of this strange case in Plzeň that was very similar to their current case. This actually happened several months before Dita's body had been found in December of 1991. Then a 22-year-old woman named Kamila Fejtova was traveling with a boyfriend on a bus. Now, Kamila had actually been married before, but things didn't really work out. And so after her divorce, Kamila became a single mother to a 3-year-old boy. And she only really started dating her new boyfriend recently, but it already felt tense. And that night was no different. It was close to 1 a.m. when the couple ended up yet in another fight. But this time it seemed that they just could not reach the point where things could be resolved. So thinking it would help the situation, the boyfriend decided to just leave. He exited the bus at the next stop, not really caring about the fact that he just left his girlfriend behind. Now this of course left Kamila angry and also upset. But she was thinking to herself that she didn't really have that far to go. In fact, it was the next bus stop she would be getting off at. And so she did exactly that. But very quickly into her walk home, Kamila started to feel that something did not seem right. The night was pitch black and there was this fog everywhere, so Kamila had actually trouble seeing things around her, which only made the situation worse. She tried remaining as calm as possible, thinking to herself that she was almost home, when she suddenly heard some rustling behind her. And when she turned around to see what was making that noise, she could see this dark figure quickly approaching her. She let out this high-pitched scream, but the figure was not stopping. Kamila tried running away, but the figure grabbed her and started dragging her away into the dark bushes. Kamila began yelling for help. She tried kicking and scratching whoever it was that was pulling her away from the path, but nothing was working. Kamila could then feel being picked up and thrown onto the grassy ground, and then everything went black. 18 days later, her mutilated body was found in the woods. Her organs were removed. Her arms were gone. It was Dita's case all over again, but much worse. One witness came forward to say that they actually heard some woman shouting for help at around 1 a.m. that night, and apparently this went on for a few moments, and so the witness got onto the balcony to see where this commotion was coming from, but they couldn't really tell because of this thick fog. And then the screaming stopped, and so the witness returned to her bed, not really doing anything about it. Now all of this happened where Petr Šimerle, the prime suspect in Dita's case, lived himself, and so the police really zoomed in on him. Šimerle's ex-wife even testified that he had known Kamila very well, even though he tried to say otherwise. And eventually, Šimerle was ordered to take a polygraph test, also known as the lie detector test, but he ended up failing it. He had claimed that in Kamila's case, he had been away in Germany visiting his friends, but that turned out to be a lie. But even with all of this, he was never formally charged because of the lack of hard evidence. But then came yet another surprise. Several years later, in 1994, Kamila was thought to be linked to yet another mysterious murder. This was of a 19-year-old Eva Manlova who had been found brutally murdered in her flat in Prague. But again, there was never any concrete evidence against Kamila, but just like in the other cases, there were a lot of similarities. All of these women were young, attractive, and all were found brutally murdered. But then, before anything could ever be proven, Kamila just vanished. Now, the last anyone heard, he had fled to Germany and died of an overdose in 1998. But to this day, no one really knows for sure if that's true or not. And so just like that, the police were left empty-handed again. Of course, Kamila was not the only suspect in this case. There were others. And the one really worth mentioning is Zdeněk T., who had been accused of assaulting a woman in 1994. But what really puts this man into the frame is the fact that when the investigators were searching his house, they had found this long list of women's names together with their contact number. And one of them was Dita's own mother. But again, before the police could get any further, Zdeněk was beaten to death with a baseball bat during an attempted car theft. And his body? Dumped into a dam, wrapped in a steel mesh. Exactly like the infamous eerily murders. I've actually already covered this case, so if you've missed it, then I'll leave a link to it down below, because it's really one that you want to know about. Because of these similarities, people actually began to think, was this just a robbery? Or was this some sort of silencing? As the time went by, these bizarre cases grew only colder by the day. Because of the surgical precision, the investigators even wondered if this had something to do with organ harvesting and illegal trade. And after all, there was those extremely detailed forms Dita had to fill out, even containing questions about a blood type, which is just something that was unheard of. No agency out there goes into so much detail, but for some reason, that one did. The question still also remains whether Dita and Kamila's cases were linked to the same killer, or whether there were two different predators that just happened to have the same modus operandi, targeting the same type of young women. And then there's the most disturbing part of it all. Dita's case got officially time-barred in 2012. This means that her killer, if he's still out there and alive, will never get charged, even if the person confesses. This is definitely one of the most ridiculous and frustrating sides of the Czech jurisdiction system, which, by the way, is still active to this day. The usual length is 15 years, which in some cases can be extended to 30, but if those years pass, then you can legally be never charged for that crime ever again. So if you're wondering whether someone out there literally got away with murder, well, they did, and legally. Unfortunately, this means that we shall never really have the answers to many burning questions that had been left behind. Like, for example, what really happened to Dita and Kamila? Was the killer hiding in plain sight? Or were these murders something even darker than anyone dared to imagine? Now, as always, I would really love to know your theories on this one, so please let me know in the comment section below. And if you want to hear about another case that might be even worse than this one that's actually been haunting the Czech Republic since the 1930s, then check out the story shown on your screen now. Until next time.